when one officer planned 17 bridge demolitions until his suicide mission worked. It sounds impossible. It sounds insane. And in the winter of 1944, on the collapsing Western Front, it nearly was. This is the story of Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Roth, a 29-year-old engineer officer of the German Wehrmacht, serving with Pioneer Battalion 253, attached to the 11th Panzer Division. What he accomplished in just 36 hours would become one of the most daring and least known engineer operations of the entire war. The time was December 17, 1944, the second day of Hitler's last major offensive in the West. Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes Offensive. The location: the dense, frozen forests and river valleys around Ettelbruck, Burscheid, and the twisting bends of the Sauer River in Luxembourg. With American forces of the 81st Infantry Division advancing faster than expected, German engineers were ordered to do the unthinkable: destroy 17 strategically vital bridges before U.S. armor could capture them. But, with enemy patrols already entering the villages, with explosives running dangerously low, and with most access roads under fire, one man stepped forward. One officer said, "I'll do it." Pause. This is how Oberleutnant Roth's so-called suicide mission not only succeeded, but changed the tempo of the American advance for days. To understand the man, we must understand the moment. By mid-December 1944, Germany was desperate. The Eastern Front was collapsing. The Allies were closing from the West, and Hitler's last gamble, the Ardennes Offensive, depended on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. The 11th Panzer Division, once known as the Ghost Division for its speed in Russia, had been transferred from the Eastern Front only weeks earlier. Exhausted, understrength, and short on fuel, it was thrown into a defensive role to hold the Sauer River crossings. If the Americans captured the river bridges intact, they could bypass the German prepared lines and break into the rear of the Panzer Lehr and 5th Panzer armies. If the Germans destroyed them, the U.S. advance would stall. Simple on paper, impossible in reality. Enter Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Roth. Born in Würzburg, trained as a civil engineer, Roth had spent most of the war constructing fortifications on the Eastern Front. He knew the mathematics of demolition better than most officers in the Wehrmacht. His men called him der Rechner, the calculator, because he could estimate explosive charges in his head faster than others could reach for a slide rule. But Roth was no desk officer. At Kiev, 1943, he had personally rigged a rail viaduct under Soviet fire. At Tarnopol, he pulled wounded sappers from a burning bridge after the first charges misfired. He had been offered staff positions twice. He refused both. And now, on the freezing morning of December 17th, he stood before his battalion commander, Major Friedrich Niemöller, who relayed the Army Group B order. All 17 bridges in the sector must be prepared for demolition by nightfall. Roth stared at the map. The bridges were spread over a 31-kilometer stretch of river, many isolated by blown roads or blocked valleys. American reconnaissance units, likely from the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, were already reported near Heiderscheid. He did the calculations silently. He would need 800 kilograms of Sprengstoff, 28 and 40, 130 detonators, 17 firing cables, and at least 40 trained sappers. He had 300 kilograms of explosives, 40 detonators, 6 functioning firing cables, and 13 exhausted men. It was an impossible order. Major Niemöller quietly told him what others whispered: Ein Himmelfahrtskommando, a suicide mission. Roth nodded once. Then he said the words that would define him: "Give me the map. I'll start in Ettelbruck. Pause. The mission began. By 1400 hours, the team set out in two Opel Blitz trucks, one carrying explosives, the other carrying tools, and the 13-man sapper squad. Snow fell in thick sheets, reducing visibility to barely 40 meters. The roads twisted through steep ravines and frozen streams. Roth's first objective, Bridge 11B, the Ettelbruck Rail Bridge. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Refugees streamed through the town. A German Feldgendarmerie unit tried to direct traffic. The sound of distant artillery echoed from the north. The sapper sergeant, Unteroffizier Wenzel, approached Roth. "Sir, American armored cars reported near Grossbuß. If they cut the road, we're trapped." Roth responded calmly. "Then we work faster." They set charges on the steel girders, just 12 kilograms per beam, carefully wedged to maximize downward collapse. But when Roth checked the firing cable, it barely reached 30 meters. He needed 120. He looked at the problem. Then he ordered the men to strip telephone lines from the nearby command post. He tied the copper wire together manually. In the freezing wind, his fingers bled as he worked. At 15-20 hours, Bridge 11B was armed. But there were 16 more. By late afternoon, the light began to fade. The trucks crawled uphill toward Burscheid, where an old stone bridge crossed a narrow gorge. Snow whipped across the valley, stinging their faces. As the team unloaded charges, they heard the unmistakable clatter of a Browning .30 caliber machine gun. American forces. A scout platoon from the 318th Infantry Regiment was less than 600 meters away. The sappers froze. Roth did not. He ordered half the men to set the charges while the others formed a defensive perimeter. They had only 2 MP-40 rifles and rifles. If the Americans pushed, they would be overrun in minutes. By 1645, the bridge was wired, but they lacked enough explosives to guarantee the arch's collapse. Roth made a decision he later admitted frightened him more than anything in Russia. He crawled under the arch, hacking grooves into the mortar with a chisel to weaken the structure. Snow melted against his body heat, dripping icily down his neck as he worked. When he emerged, covered in dust and frost, Wenzel whispered, "Sir, that was madness." Roth replied, "We still have 15 to go." Night fell. The temperature plunged below -10 degrees Celsius. The truck's engines struggled on icy inclines. The sapper squad had now been working for 6 hours without rest. At Velscheid, 2 small wooden bridges spanned a fork of the river. These were quick demolitions, but the danger came from the road. Tracks. Fresh. American. Likely an M8 Greyhound or M5 Stuart from the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. Roth ordered the trucks concealed beneath pine branches. The men worked silently, knowing that one loud clang of steel could give away their position. At 19:15, both bridges were ready. 1/3 of the mission complete. The hardest parts still ahead. The middle section of the route was the worst. The valleys were narrow, winding, and blocked by fallen trees. Twice the men had to exit the trucks and push them over icy ruts. By the time they reached Bridge 7, the men's breath came in ragged gasps. Their gloves were frozen stiff. Several had bleeding knuckles. At Bridge 6, a critical problem, the detonators froze. Roth warmed them under his armpits until they were pliable again. It was a dangerous, reckless act. If one misfired, he would be killed instantly. Wenzel begged him to stop. Roth told him, "If these bridges stand at dawn, our division dies." Pause. Pressure mounted. By 2300 hours, the men heard engines, heavy ones, echoing across the valley. American armor. possibly Sherman's. The sound grew closer. Roth checked his watch. They had 7 more bridges, stretched over 14 kilometers of brutal winter terrain. Fatigue clawed at him. His vision blurred. His boots were soaked. His hands trembled from cold and adrenaline. But he kept moving. This bridge was vital. If captured intact, American armor could roll deep into the German rear. As Roth inspected the structure, flares rose in the sky. American illumination rounds. The valley lit up like day. The men dove for cover behind boulders. A U.S. patrol advanced along the road. The mission was moments from failure. Roth made a choice. He crawled under the bridge alone. He set every remaining kilogram of Sprengstoff 40 directly under the main load-bearing beam. The charges were unstable. The firing cable was only partially insulated. But the job was done. He signaled the men. They withdrew into the dark, just as American voices drifted only 150 meters away. A simple structure, easy to destroy. But as they crossed the river, the ice cracked beneath them. One sapper fell knee-deep into freezing water. Roth dragged him out, but the man's leg was numb and useless. They couldn't stop. They couldn't turn back. They left him in a barn with blankets and a pistol. The mission continued. Roth saved this one for late night for a reason. It was the longest, most complex target. A 55-meter steel bridge requiring a full load of explosives they no longer had. They had to improvise. Using only 1/3 of the necessary charges, Roth placed them at mathematically ideal stress points. The placement had to be perfect. Otherwise, the bridge would only partially collapse. He measured distances by pacing the beams in darkness, counting each step. His quiet confidence steadied the men. When they finished, Wenzel looked at him. "Sir, one left." Roth nodded. "One." It was nearly 300 hours when they arrived at the final bridge, a narrow iron truss span near Kautenbach. Exhaustion crushed them. Several men stumbled as they walked. Their breath hung thick in the frozen air. And then, headlights. American headlights. A motorized column was approaching from the north, possibly elements of the 317th Infantry Regiment. They had minutes, maybe less. Roth didn't hesitate. He ordered, "Explosives only on the central joint. Forget the rest. Move!" As the men set the final charge, the growl of engines grew louder. Roth himself connected the cable. Then he turned to Wenzel. "Light the fuse." Wenzel blinked. "Now?" Now. What happened next pushed the mission into legend. The fuse burned. The men sprinted toward cover behind the tree line. Snow crunched under their boots. Their lungs burned with each breath. The Americans rounded the bend. An M8 armored car. Behind it, a column of infantry riding on trucks. They were just 200 yards from the bridge. Roth glanced back. The fuse sparked. Nothing happened. A misfire. The worst nightmare of any engineer. Without the explosion, the Americans would capture the crossing and roll straight into the German rear. Wenzel shouted, "Sir, it didn't go." Roth didn't think, didn't hesitate. He grabbed a spare detonator and sprinted toward the bridge as American gunfire erupted. Bullets ricocheted off the steel beams. Sparks flashed around him. The sappers screamed for him to stop. He didn't. He slid under the bridge, fingers numb, hands shaking, trying desperately to reconnect the firing line. One wrong move, one bullet, one slipping foot, and he would die instantly. Above him, boots thudded onto the bridge planks, American scouts crossing. Roth jammed the final wire into the blasting cap. He whispered, "For Germany, for my men," and pressed the plunger. The valley exploded. A roaring blast ripped through the night, echoing off the cliffs. Snow cascaded from the trees. A shock wave rippled across the frozen river. The bridge collapsed in a deafening shriek of twisting metal. American soldiers on the crossing were thrown into the darkness as the central span buckled. The armored car braked hard, skidding sideways on the icy road. The remaining German sappers stared in stunned silence. He had done it. All 17 bridges. Every single one. The American column halted, trapped on the far side of the chasm. Engineers would need days to rebuild or bypass the destroyed crossings. The German line, the battered remnants of the 11th Panzer Division, held. But where was Roth? Wenzel ran toward the blast site. For a moment, he feared the worst. Then, emerging from the smoke and drifting snow, limping heavily and covered in soot, Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Roth appeared, clutching his blasting machine, his coat torn and burned. The men rushed to him. He said only, "It worked." By dawn on December 18th, American engineers confirmed what Roth had accomplished. Every bridge along the Sauer in the German sector had been destroyed or rendered unusable. The U.S. 81st Infantry Division was forced to redirect its attack northward, delaying its advance by nearly 48 hours, a critical window that allowed German forces to regroup. Roth and his 13-man sapper squad finally slept, some collapsing instantly inside a darkened barn, others too exhausted even to remove their boots. Their mission had lasted 36 hours without rest. They had eaten nothing but frozen bread. 3 men suffered frostbite. 1 never rejoined the unit, but all 14 returned alive. Roth received the Eisernes Kreuz Erste Klasse, Iron Cross First Class, for the operation. His battalion commander recommended him for the German Cross in gold, but documentation at the chaotic end of the war was lost. After the war, he returned to civil engineering. He rarely spoke of the mission. When asked how he managed it, he reportedly said, "I did the math, and then I trusted my men." His actions remain one of the most remarkable feats of combat engineering in the Ardennes, one that stopped an American advance cold, not with tanks or artillery, but with wire cutters, explosives, and sheer will. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.